Okay, thank you all for coming. I'm Summer. I'm the curator here at the museum. We apologize for the inconvenience of the parking lot. It was supposed to be repaved during the hurricane, but that didn't happen, so we have it today. Hopefully it's not too loud of a distraction. But speaking of distractions, please turn off or silence your phones so we don't have any of that. As for announcements, tickets for Holiday Home Tour are now for sale. You can get them here at the museum or online. They're $35 before November 28th, but on November 28th or after, they will be $40, so get them as soon as you can. We are also having an exclusive preview tour followed by cocktails at the Williams House on December 1st. Tickets for that event are available online only, and they are $70. We are also having another pop-up fundraiser coming up called Trying Times and Tenacious Women. It'll be an interactive presentation telling stories of local women in the 17th and 18th centuries. Tickets go on sale on October 10th, and the event is on November 4th. As for upcoming programs, our October 3rd on 3rd on the 21st will be with Sam Carr, who will speak about naturalist William Bartram's travels through the region. And then our November brown bag lunch on November 2nd will be with Yvonne Randolph, who is a local nature photographer. You might have seen her bird photography on Facebook. She'll speak about getting started with amateur photography. So that's it for announcements, but today we have Christopher Bogosh. Christopher W. Bogosh is a published author and outdoor enthusiast. He met John Muir during a series about our national parks. He started writing projects in the genre of creative nonfiction and hiking/cycling the Florida Trail System. After discovering that Muir had visited our area and wrote about it, an exciting journey of joyful research, writing, and delighting in this historical event began. So everyone, please welcome Christopher Bogosh.
Thanks, everyone. Glad to see you all out here on a Wednesday afternoon as well, at lunchtime. Who knows John Muir? Raise your hand.
Personally?
Maybe some people might know him personally. Is anybody here that old? So the places we're going to cover here today, we're going to look at his journey through what I've entitled the Wild, Wild South. And has anybody read his 1,000-mile walk to the Gulf? Well, that traces his journey, and that's what we're going to look at. We're going to have things punctuated throughout this talk with his journey he started up in Louisville, Kentucky, and he traveled down, but we're going to start in Savannah, Georgia. Who's been to Savannah? Bonaventure Cemetery? Yeah. Wonderful place, isn't it? We're going to look a little bit at that. Then he took a steamboat down here to Fernandina Beach back in 1867. And then from Fernandina Beach, he went on through to different areas. You can think of like Callahan, Baldwin, Waldo, all these places that you go on through Gainesville. And then that's it, Gainesville. And believe it or not, I was surprised when I found out about this. Micanopy. Has anybody heard of Micanopy, Florida? That was actually
Micanopy.
Micanopy. See? Micanopy. That was actually larger than Gainesville at one time. That was like the main area. I was surprised to see that. Micanopy. And then, of course, his journey terminated at Cedar Key. Has anybody here been to Cedar Key? Yeah. And so anyways, we're going to look at that stuff. And like I said, we will look at it through the lens of a 1,000-mile walk to the Gulf that John Muir published in 1916. And we're going to look also at Senator Yulee, Senator David Levy Yulee, or Levy Yulee, right? Levy. And so he actually established the Florida Railroad system here from Fernandina Beach all the way down to Cedar Key, and that was the trek that John Muir walked upon. So, who was John Muir? That's a picture of him in around 1867 when he was traveling through Florida in this area. Theodore Roosevelt gave this estimate of John Muir in 1915. I quote, "It was my good fortune to know John Muir. He had written me even before I met him personally. Later, when as president I visited the Yosemite, John Muir fulfilled the promise he had at that time made to me. I spent a delightful 3 days and 2 nights with him. He was an emphatically good citizen. Not only are his books delightful, not only is he the author to whom all men turn when they think of the Sierras and the northern glaciers and the giant trees of the California slope, but he was also, what few nature lovers are, a man able to influence contemporary thought and action on the subjects to which he had devoted his life. John Muir talked even better than he wrote. His greatest influence was always upon those who were brought into personal contact with him. But he wrote well, and while his books have not the peculiar charm that a very, very few other writers on similar subjects have had, they will nevertheless last long. Our generation owes much to John Muir, and John Muir, as many of you probably know, is the father of the national park system here in the United States of America. So he was a very influential figure in that way, and then you see the Yosemite behind him, and of course the trees, the large trees are the sequoias. Has anybody here seen a sequoia tree before? Just a marvelous, marvelous tree. His books are delightful. If you go on he founded the Sierra Club, and if you go on the Sierra Club website, you'll find a list of all his books, and they own the copyrights to them, and you can read them all for free. And one of the things I would encourage you to do is to read him, because he is funny. He is really, really witty. In this book, A 1,000-Mile Walk to the Gulf, he has some episodes in there where he's talking about the interactions he's having with people. And I was overwhelmed with laughter because he's so funny and witty. So there's the map of his southern hike. You see there, Muir started his journey in Louisville, walked to Savannah, sailed to Fernandina Beach, and walked to Cedar Key. Then he eventually sailed to Cuba. So we're going to be starting right here and travel down and all the way down to Cedar Key. So a 1856 map of the Florida railroads. Has anybody seen this map before? That's the Florida Railroad, and here you see, this is Yulee's Railroad that travels from Fernandina Beach all the way down here through this Baldwin, and then right down through here, and Gainesville area, and then right down to Cedar Key, and we'll zoom in on that a little bit so you can see it better. So that's 1856, so that's what, 11 years before Muir came into Florida to travel down that road, that railroad. And then here's a modern map, so you can actually go. So when I actually cycled this entire route, 155 miles. And I started up here in Fernandina Beach and cycled down. So basically the railroad in the past basically just follows 301. And then when you get into Gainesville, over here you have UF. That kind of diverted the original railroad because the railroad went through here. But 24 goes down, it just loops around the back of Gainesville, and then down 24 to Cedar Key. And if you go down the southern parts there where you see Bronson and Otter Creek, you'll actually see plaques or road signs that indicate where the different railroad depots were at in those little village areas that were present when Muir came through this area. So interesting, if you ever go on a trip and visit around, right here you drive up, what is it, 200? If you drive up 200, we have Muir Ecological Park. Has anybody ever been there? And there's a little walk out into the woods there, and if you go out there to the end of that boardwalk, you'll see the actual railroad bed that Muir would have walked upon going down that direction. And then if you go up to New Wildlife area, they actually have a whole memorial of his journey through that area. They have plaques there and stuff like that. So there's a lot of little areas where you can go and see where Muir traveled. So, Senator Yulee's timeline. I've often wondered about John's 155-mile trek from Fernandina Beach to Cedar Key along the railroad that passed my house in Yulee. And I live just before Lofton Creek. Do you know where Lofton Creek is at? Right before that, off of Middlefield Bluff. This railroad was Florida's first, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. The Florida Railroad Company, headed by my town's namesake, David Levy Yulee, was incorporated on January 8, 1853. Construction on Florida's Cross Peninsula Railroad started in Fernandina Beach in 1855 and was completed in Cedar Key in March of 1861. Just in time for what? What happened in 1861? Civil War, right? Shortly after that, the Civil War broke out and the Union Army took possession of the two railroad hubs immediately. At the beginning of the Civil War, the Uss Hatteras, ever heard of that ship? One of the first battle steamships, and it was actually sunk in Texas, the Gulf of Mexico in the Houston area, I think, Texas area, but it actually took control of Cedar Key and destroyed the railroad depot. Later that same year in 1862, the North took control of the opposite hub at Fernandina Beach and secured our own Fort Clinch over there. In 1864, after the Union defeat of Ullusty, is anybody here gone to Ullusty battlefield? The Confederacy after the Confederacy won that battle, and what they did is they actually traveled south and they dismantled Yulee's railroad tracks and they diverted the railroad from Live Oak, Florida, up to Lawton, Georgia, so they had transport routes north and south for the war. Yulee wasn't very happy when they dismantled those tracks, by the way, even though he was a supporter of the Confederacy. As a result of his allegiance to the South, Yulee was a Confederate. Yulee was imprisoned for treason at Fort Pulaski in Savannah, Georgia, another place to go and visit. And along with crimes linked to secession, he attempted to aid the unsuccessful escape of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. So he was actually in relationship with Davis as well. And he tried to facilitate his escape by receiving his luggage, because Davis was going to retreat to that area, and he received part of the Confederate treasury. But of course, things happened differently. And that was at the treasury at his cottonwood plantation in Archer, Florida. Has anybody ever seen that in Archer, Florida? There's a yellow building there. It's actually that's a nice little area, quaint little town, historic town. And there's actually a depot there where Yulee would have did his cotton transactions with people. So he was arrested and imprisoned in 1866. General Ulysses S. Grant intervened for Yulee's release, and he was pardoned by President Andrew Johnson. Now, I was thinking about that. Robin and I were talking about it, my wife and I were like, what's that, Andrew Jackson? Did I get that name on? No. Andrew Johnson, do you know who Andrew Johnson was?
Yeah.
Vice President to Lincoln, right? Yulee returned to Archer, rebuilt his railroad, and he was instrumental in Florida's restoration after the Civil War. Another interesting, and just as a sidebar, I was doing a little reading when I was reading about Yulee, is his father, Moses Elijah Levy, and he dropped the name Yulee. He was a Moroccan ancestor in relationship to the royalty, and they were Jewish, of course. But Yulee put that name back on his name when he became a senator. But actually, how do you say it again? Micanopy? Micanopy. Because that's where he established Elijah Moses Yulee. Elijah Levy established I'm going to twist all these names up, I'm sorry. He established a agrarian type of refuge for Jewish people because they were being persecuted under the Napoleonic Wars. And so he started this agrarian culture out there in that area. Everything fell apart with the Seminole Wars, and he ended up moving over. He lost everything. His father, Yulee's father, lost everything, moved over to St. Augustine, but he was able to reclaim all of his property before he died. And he ended up dying at a sulfur spring up in Virginia. And I find it interesting, you didn't go to the sulfur springs over there near the, what's that?
White Spring?
White Springs, or in that area. But anyways, so that's a little side note there. So the Florida Railroad Company, oh, there's Yulee. And you probably have seen that statue, haven't you? Yeah. And I like the greenback there. You see the steamship on there, 1867. That's the time when Muir came through this area. All right. There he is, Confederate. And there's President Jefferson Davis. That's the building I'm talking about in Archer, Florida. That's the train depot where he did his pumping transaction stuff. And that's the prison at Fort Pulaski that he was at. So, Florida Railroad Time Company, 1853, the Florida Railroad Company is established. 1855, construction begins in Fernandina Beach. 1861, construction is completed in Cedar Key. 1862, USS Hatteras raids Cedar Key, destroys the depot, got an S on that. 1862, Union troops secure Fort Clinch, control the railroad. 1864 is the Battle of Uss. Confederate victory, railroad diverted. 1866, our railroad company restores the railroad, and then of course Muir comes through in 1867, just to set some of the context there. And you see the building there, did that building look familiar? Yeah. That's the one that's, of course, has been since restored, and that's going into Cedar Key, actually. And there you have a map of Fernandina Beach, and that map is on the back wall there. I think I'll probably use the pointer for that. Right there, if you look at that map, it's a little clearer, I think, than this one. But right here, you have the, that would be their depot right there. There's Center Street, historically. And then you can, people come in on the ship there. And then a map of Cedar Key coming in. If you've been to Cedar Key, you notice that the roadway usually goes this way into the the areas where all the restaurants are and stuff. But this is actually the opposite way, that the train came in. And here they now have a park. It's like a memorial park. And up here, this is one of the things that I found so nostalgic. Here, these pylons, this is a train bridge, and I have a picture of it, and I'll show you later. But these pylons actually still exist after this section here is like a little nature trail, and then it terminates in the pylons before it goes in. So we'll be looking at that. So John did not mention Yulee or the Florida Railroad Company, but he spoke a great deal about the devastation of the Civil War. And I quote John Muir now. The traces of war are not only apparent on the broken fields, burnt fences, mills, and woods ruthlessly slaughtered, but also on the countenances of the people. Only the old trees, wholly a half dead, bear marks of the calamity. So it is with the people of this war field. Happy, unscathed, and unclouded youth growing up around the aged, half-consumed, and fallen parents, who bear in sad measure the ineffaceable marks of the farthest reachings and most infernal of all civilized calamities. Well, the aftermath of the Civil War is hard to imagine. The aftermath of the Civil War are hard to imagine. While the marks of the Civil War were evident throughout the nation, of course, as John traveled into the deep south to our area, particularly Georgia, the wreckage was awful. Most of it was due to General William T. Sherman's march to the sea. The Union Army ruthlessly slaughtered cattle, destroyed infrastructure, and engaged in other horrendous acts associated with young men in war. 40% of the livestock died, and 50% of the South's farm machinery was demolished, along with bridges, levees, roads, and other public infrastructure. Bands of starving, we were talking about that, right? Starving, homeless, and destitute black and white Southerners roamed the countryside. I mean, the South was devastated. And a lot of it was due to this march that Sherman did through the South. Look what he said there. I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah with 150 heavy guns and plenty of ammunition. And he said that to President Lincoln. And also about 25,000 bales of cotton. So amazing. Amazing what, you think back then, the technology was not as advanced as we have today. And that was only a march for November 15th to December 21th. Less than a month, right? And there's some pictures. Oh, there's Sherman right there. You may know the Sherman tank is named after him, right? Can you imagine why? There's some ripping up some of the train tracks. Little buildings demolished there. Train carousel, the trains can't go anywhere because all the trains are all destroyed. I mean the train tracks rather, the railroad. There's some destitute Southerners. See this guy over here with the cane? You know, he probably was a Confederate soldier perhaps. And that's the freed slaves here. All right. Georgia, Bonaventure, and Savannah. Now some more happy stuff. I found a road, and I'm quoting Muir now from his 1,000-mile walk. I found a road which led me to the Bonaventure graveyard. Part of the grounds was cultivated and planted with live oak. About 100 years ago, by a wealthy gentleman who had his country residence here, but much of the greater part is undisturbed. Even those spots which are disordered by art, I love this quote, even those spots which are disordered by art, he's talking about the art as the tombstones, nature is ever at work to reclaim and to make them look as if the foot of man had never known them. And you see the vines growing up on there and the moss and all of that stuff. So anyways, I lost my spot here, sorry about that. Ever at work to reclaim them and to make them look as if the foot of man had never known them. Only a small plot of the ground is occupied with graves, and the old mansion is in ruins. And that's the entrance into Bonaventure. The most conspicuous glory of Bonaventure is its noble avenue of live oaks. They are the most magnificent planted trees I've ever seen, about 50 feet high and perhaps 3 or 4 feet in diameter, with broad, spreading, leafy heads. The main branches reach out horizontally until they come together over the driveway, embowering it throughout its entire length, while each branch is adorned like a garden with Spanish moss, ferns, flowers, and grasses. Aren't live oaks like some of the most magnificent trees? They really are, truly. Then he goes on here. The money package, so here he is, he's at Savannah area, he's at Bonaventure Cemetery, kind of exploring around and stuff like that, but he's running out of money. And he's urgent because he's hungry. Now imagine this, okay? In the episode in the book, he talks about how he was going into Bonaventure Cemetery and he was dying of thirst. And he went down to this slimy pool of water, fearful of alligators and snakes, and he's drinking that kind of water. If you think about it when you see it around here, you know. But anyways, he must have had an iron gut, that's for sure. The money package that I was expecting did not arrive in Savannah. And John Muir, incidentally, he's from Wisconsin. I don't know if you knew that or not. Did not arrive in Savannah, so his brother was sending him the package. Did not arrive in Savannah until the following week. After stopping the first night at the cheap, disreputable-looking hotel, I had only about $1.50 left in my purse, and so was compelled to camp out to make it last and buying only bread. Now, he first went to the sand dunes in Savannah, but he said when he went out there, it was like, there's bugs all over the place, the cactuses were poking him and all this other stuff, and he heard all the freed slaves around him, so he gets scared. So he's thinking to himself, where can I go to sleep? I'm tired. Bands of freed slaves were wandering around everywhere, and I was afraid. I suddenly thought about the graveyard, he said. There, thought I, is an unideal place for a penniless wanderer. There no superstitious, prowling mischief-maker dares venture for fear of haunting ghosts, while for me there would be God's rest and peace. The sun was set ere I was past the huts of the freed slaves and uncultivated rice fields, and I arrived near the graves in the silent hour of gloaming. All the avenue where I walked was in shadow, but an exposed tombstone frequently shone out of the startling whiteness and thickets of sparkleberry bushes gleamed like heaps of crystals. Not a breath of air moved the gray moss, and the great black arms of the live oaks met overhead and covered the avenue. But the canopy was fissured by many a netted seam and leafy-edged opening through which the moonlight sifted in aural rays, broadening the blackness in silvery light. Isn't that a wonderful passage? Yeah, that's some pretty good writing right there. Well, anyways, and he talks about when he finally found a place to lay down and to lay his head. You know, he said it bugs, he had these beetles crawling on his face and everything, but he finally fell asleep. And then when he woke up in the morning, he looked down and he said, "Oh, I was sleeping on a dead man's grave. The ground was heaped up." He had a pillow. And he said, "My sleep was good, but it wasn't quite as good as that guy's down there." So anyways, the same day in which the money arrived in Savannah, I took passage on the steamship Sylvan Shore. And that was like a ferry system they had that went all the way up from New York down to Jamestown and down to this area for Fernandina, Florida. The daylight part of the sail along the coast was full of novelty, and by association awakened memories of my Scottish days at Dunbar and the Firth of Forth. Of course, John Muir was a Scotchman. And here we have a map of Fernandina Beach again. We were all discharged by the captain of the steamer without breakfast the next day. I discovered a baker, bought some bread, and without asking a single question, made for the shade. I threw down my press and little bag, that's a plant press he had with him because he was, gathering plants, and little bag beneath a thicket where there was a dry spot on some broken heaps of grass and roots, and applied myself to my breakfast. I lay on my elbow, eating my bread, gazing and listening to the profound strangeness about me. I was lonely. While thus engaged, I was startled from these gatherings of melancholy by a rustling sound in the rushes behind me. Had my mind been in health, and my body not starved, I should have only have turned calmly to the noise of a glorious white crane. But in this half-starved, unfriended condition, I could have no healthy thought, and I at once believed that the sound came from an alligator. Who's moved down here? I thought I was going to see alligators everywhere when I came down here, and they were going to attack me. I fancied I could feel the stroke of his long notched tail, and could see his big jaws and rows of teeth closing with a springy snap on me. I was ashamed and tried to excuse myself on account of bonaventure anxiety and hunger. So he said he only saw one alligator in his whole trip through Florida. Florida is so watery and vine-tied that pathless wanderings are not easily possible in any direction. And that actually is a little stream off of Lofton Creek near my house, and that's my side yard. And there's that train. Anybody notice that picture? Where is that at? You drive right down the street there, you'll run into it. That's the train track that Muir walked on when he was heading out of town here. I started to cross the state by a gap hewn for the locomotive, walking sometimes on the rails, stepping from tie to die, walking on the strip of land at the sides, gazing into the mysterious forest, nature's own. And you can imagine how much more closer all the trees were and stuff when he was going through there. I was meeting so many strange plants that I was much excited, making many stops to get specimens, but I could not force my way far through the swampy forest. Think about all that area down there. It's built up on, but it's pretty swampy still. Although so tempting and full of promise, regardless of water snakes or insects, I endeavored repeatedly to force my way through the tough vine tangles, but seldom succeeded in getting farther than a few hundred yards. Flower and beauty I had in abundance, but no bread. A serious matter is this bread which perishes, and could I be dispensed with, I doubt if civilization would ever have seen me again. I walked briskly, watching for a house, as well as the grand assemblies of novel plants. Near the middle of forenoon, I came to a shanty where a party of loggers were getting out long pines for ship spars. They were the wildest of all the white savages I have met. And I was going to add this, but it would have been too long. But when he was up coming into the South, he ran into ex-guerrillas in Tennessee. You know, these Confederate, these bands of people who would rob people. You know what I mean? Because they were starving. So he makes this comment here. Long-haired ex-guerrillas of the mountains of Tennessee and North Carolina are uncivilized fellows, but for downright barbarism, these Florida loggers excel. Nevertheless, they gave me a portion of the yellow pork and hominy without either apparent hospitality, or a grudge. And I was glad to escape to the forest again. The streams of Florida are still young, and in many places are untraceable. I expected to find these streams a little discolored from the vegetable matter that I knew they must contain. And I was sure that in so flat a country, I should not find any considerable falls or long rapids. In the deep places, the streams are as black as ink, perfectly opaque and glossy on the surface as if varnished. It often is difficult to ascertain which way they are flowing or creeping. So slowly and so widely do they circulate through the tree tangles and swamps of the woods. The flowers here are strangers to me, but not more than the rivers and lakes. Both streams appear to travel, but those in Florida do not appear to travel at all and seem to know nothing of a sea. And here's Gainesville. So if you go, and this is the historic center, and here would be, UF would be in that area. And if you go, this is a nice little area. Anybody gone to that historic center in Gainesville? The historic area. There's some nice little houses there and stuff. Then, of course, I'm going to butcher the name again. Micanopy. That's Micanopy down here. Orendo is still there. Over here is, if you go through Gainesville, all here is all the shopping area now. It's all built up. But there's actually when you get down here to Orendo, there's actually the bike path picks up again and takes you down, probably about 25, 30 miles to like Bronson area, the Archer area actually. And the largest oak is actually on that, live oak is on that tree, on that trail. Gainesville is rather attractive, an oasis in the desert compared with other villages. It gets its life from the few plantations located about it on dry ground that rises island-like a few feet above the swamps. I passed several thrifty cotton plantations with comfortable residences, contrasting sharply with the squalid hovels of my first days in Florida. And that's his journal, actually, a copy of it. You can see here, I'll read a section here. So I spent nearly all day investigating the land and surrounding area. I encountered limestone, flint, corals, and shells. And you can see here, he talks about dry land nearly all day, limestone, flint, so coral, shells. But you can see he's edited it. And this is, remember, he wrote, this is a journal on the journey in 1867. And then he wrote the book in 1950, so he's taking the notes and stuff, but he's quite an artist, isn't he? There he is right there. And there you have, he met these two people on the way, and there's a little boy laying on the ground there. Come, Sonny, eat your hominy, was what they said. He quoted him. But anyways, I thought that was pretty neat to add in there. But I tell you, he's a witty guy if you read him. That's actually Gainesville back when he went through there. I obtained food and lodging at a sort of tavern. I don't know, maybe one of those buildings there. And then there's those pylons I told you about. So you actually come out here, like I'm walking down the nature trail here, and then you get, this was like so nostalgic for me. I was like, wow, this is awesome. and seeing, the rod on them. But the train is actually, it's raised up and you just kind of walk out of the woods, and then that would have went into the area. Let me see, I can get the map. Yeah, see right here. So you're coming out here, and then right there would be the pylons going into Cedar Key. Okay. Today I reached the sea. While I was yet many miles back in the palmy woods, I caught the scent of the salt breeze, which, although I had so many years lived far from the sea breezes, suddenly conjured up Dunbar, its rocky coast, winds, and waves, and my whole childhood, that seemed to have utterly vanished in the new world, was now restored amid the Florida woods that by that one breath from the sea. And incidentally, when I was cycling into Cedar Key, you come up over this bridge and the salt air just kind of hits you. It's a wonderful thing, and I was thinking about that passage there. And of course the map of Cedar Key, the roadway now, so this actually, the roadway now goes in this way, and there's a nice bed and breakfast. What was the name of bed and breakfast on 2nd Street, was it? It was over here in this area. There's a but bed and breakfast there. Anyway, just a nice little place. If you go kayaking too, you can go up there kayaking.
So at that time, it looks like Cedar Key was a lot bigger than Gainesville.
Yeah, I don't know what the scale is, but I don't think there's any properties out here on this island now. I think that's all
Florida.
national land. But you can see, anybody know what Cedar Key was, what they did in Cedar Key is they actually made pencils. Right, they cut all the juniper cedars down, so they would cut them down, and all these plants here, they would actually manufacture, they cut them into shapes, and then what they would do is send them up on the train to Fernandina Beach and then ship them up to New York, and that's where the guy who had the pencil factory would, I forget his name, we had to write a little bit about, but he had a pencil factory up there, and that's where you make the pencils. And they send them out to Europe and all around the world, these pencils. Who have thought there'd be a big business in pencils, huh? And then finally, that's where I'm at the sea. But now at the seaside, I was in difficulty. I had reached a point that I could not ford, and Cedar Key had an empty harbor. Would I proceed down the peninsula to Tampa and Key West, where I could be sure to find a vessel for Cuba? Or would I wait here like Caruso and pray for a ship? But he contracted, well, he probably contracted malaria way before, but he got sick with malaria in Cedar Key. So he ended up staying there for two more months, like basically unconscious for most of the time. And he had to be ministered to by the guy who owned the mill in that area, who took him on board. But he worked there for a little bit, 2 months, and then he finally was able to get a ship and head down to Cuba. So that's it. Any questions? Yeah.
Do you know of anything about the artist who did the artwork for Fernandina and Cedar Key?
The artwork?
The artist, did he do other towns or maps?
Oh, the map maker? I don't know. Do you know anything about
That's
that?
the first time I've seen Cedar Key done like that. I didn't realize that he did more than it looks like.
I was wondering that same thing, because the Fernandina Beach has one,
Right.
and then Cedar Key. No, I don't. Maybe the name is on there. Let's see. Oops, on the list.
Let's see.
Because it looks like the same type of work. Is there a name on that one back there?
There are many of them. They're called bird's eye views, and you could just Google bird's eye view of Philadelphia or any other place and pop up with an map that would be similar to it.
Oh, really? Okay. Bird's eye view. That's helpful. Thank you. They're like historical maps of the area?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Neat. Yeah. Good, sir.
Pencil making the only reason to put a railroad to Cedar Key?
No, they had a huge sponge business too as well, fishing, so there was other things, but pencils, because they actually deforested a lot of Cedar Key, because they, took all the juniper cedar trees and, used them for pencils, and the shakes, they probably made shingles and that type of things as well. But they have a historical museum in Cedar Key that's actually very good. Yeah, good, sir.
I think Levy's original plan was to build a railroad across the Florida Peninsula so that traffic to the Gulf did not have to go around the foot of Florida and the Keys.
I'm trying to get back to the map here. Because there was a railroad that went from, I think it started like in Jacksonville though, and went across to Tallahassee. There it is right there. This railroad here. So you're saying what was his railroad? He wanted to make like the railroad that Flagler did later?
No, he wanted to build, he wanted to short circuit the trip that made traffic from New York go around the bottom of Florida to get into the Gulf.
Yeah.
Oh,
He's
okay.
talking about boat traffic. So they'd unload all their commerce and shipping, they'd unload it in the harbor here, rail it over to Cedar Key, put it back on boats to take over to New Orleans or vice versa, coming off the Mississippi and taking it, and it circumvented going around the bottom of the state and all the dangers of the shallows down there.
Okay, yeah.
It cut a lot of time off the transit as well.
Yeah, so you're saying that they imported from Fernandina Beach down and exported then to Cedar Key with the rail and then out to New Orleans, yeah, okay. Because John Muir, well, actually he was going to, because they mentioned there was a ship that was going to go to Galveston, Texas, and I think that's where he initially went before he went to Cuba, so he took a ship from here that was headed to Galveston, Texas, and then from Galveston, Texas, he was able to get to Cuba, because he couldn't get a ship down there. Yeah. No, that's good. That's a great insight. It wasn't just the pencils. I don't want to give that impression. So there was a two-way traffic. So good, man.
Was there a particular reason why he made this track versus, across the state of Florida?
Yeah, he wanted to investigate the subtropics because he was a botanist. He was a botanist by training. And he wanted to get plants down here to see what they were like. That's the reason why he came down here. There's a humorous episode when he's up in the Cumberland Mountain area. He meets a blacksmith, and he's like, he asks his wife, "Can I stay here tonight?" That's what they basically did. They went to people's houses and they paid money so they could stay. And so the blacksmith said, "Yeah, sure, he can stay." And so he came in from his work and he was in the house with the blacksmith. So the blacksmith sat down and said grace over the meal. And he's like, "So what are you doing down here, young man?" He goes, "Oh, I'm collecting plants." He's like, "Collecting plants?" He's like, "Doesn't seem like good work for a young man like you." And he goes, he says, "Well, I think you look like a religious man, aren't you?" Because he said grace over the veil. And he said, "Oh, yes, I am." He said, "Well, you know that Solomon was the wisest man, didn't he? He wrote all about plants. And didn't Jesus say, 'Consider the lilies in the field'?" The guy said, "Oh, yeah, I guess he did." That's right. So he said he didn't ask him any more questions after that. But that was funny. But that's why he came out specifically for that. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
I really enjoyed the presentation. I need to go to the website and read the book. It sounds
Yeah, it's
one little critique though.
Yeah.
Fernandina Beach is a 1950s Chamber of Commerce invention.
okay.
Back at this period, it's Fernandina.
Fernandina,
So
gotcha.
the railroad goes from Fernandina to Cedar Key, and he traveled from Fernandina to Cedar Key. There was no Fernandina Beach back
At that, that's
then.
right.
1952.
That's what it says up there, Fernandina. Exactly. No Fernandina Beach, you're right. Yeah.
And somebody else in the audience would probably know more, but there's a Dr. Muir here in Fernandina, who is
I think
the
he's
grandson or the great-grandson of John
He's
Muir.
a pulmonologist, isn't he? He's
Is
a
it
lung
his,
doctor.
He's the pulmonologist.
Yeah. I didn't know he's a
Yeah,
grandson.
so he's here, yeah.
Wow, that's neat. I know Dr. Muir.
I know.
Yeah. Yep, good.
You mentioned earlier that you had cycled the railroad track. How long did it take you to cycle David Willie?
I did it in 2 days.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and you got to be careful because there's a lot of cars in 301.
He did.
So let's see. I stopped at, Stark is where I stopped here, so I cycled down here to Stark, stayed here, and then I cycled the rest of the way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Still questions going on?
Yeah. Any more questions? Yep, ma'am.
When did you do your cycling trip?
About a year ago, was it about a year ago? Yeah.
Wow.
I just got to, just something I did, just out of fun, it's fun. And I tell you, if you can get out there and visit these places, I encourage you to go, Plus, I love nature, so. Anything else? Anybody have any questions? Yep, sir?
I guess 40-some years later, he visited I think he visited Cedar Key looking for the woman that cared for him, like had malaria. Did he do a lot of writing about what he observed, maybe the changes were, or was that the only site he revisited?
This is the only writing I'm aware of. I know that he talked about, there was some writing about he visited the family, Hodgson was their names. Hogdson, and he visited them, and the husband had since died, but his wife was still alive. And there is a little area in Cedar Key where they actually have a little mirror area where there's a plaque and stuff like that. And he talks about this. I think it's the, is it the state of Florida or is it national? I think it's a state park actually. But if you go out there, you can see that. I don't know if you go to Cedar Key. It's near, because he lived near, if you go out to Cedar Key, anybody ever been to Shell Island? Yeah, that area there was where he was recuperating and stuff like that on Shell Island. So in that peninsula that goes out there, you can look over and see Shell Island over that way. That's an interesting place too, that Shell Island. Yeah.
That's what Santa Claus would call.
Anything else?
That's true.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One small thing is, I don't think senators were elected for the